Hey everybody, welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Great to have you with us on this Tuesday. A lot of ground to cover today. The President held a press conference. Rick Klein, political director, great to have you here. It's sort of become an uncommon occurrence these days. The President taking questions in a formal setting. He takes shouted questions every now and again. He only took two, though, right. today. And so a lot to unpack there. Of course, we also want to get to some 2020 news down the line as well. But let's start at the White House, where Jordan Phelps was in the Rose Garden for the press conference this afternoon. Jordan, the President was hosting somebody who's been known as the Trump of the tropics, President Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil, and they certainly have a lot in common. And they talked today about one big issue in particular, and that was the crisis in Venezuela. What did we learn?
Yeah, Devin, the Rose Garden press conference really focused on Venezuela. The president didn't have to take on any of those questions on a lot of the news of day issues pressing him back at home. But on Venezuela, the president said, as he has been saying all along, that all options remain on the table. But he hinted that perhaps the United States will get tougher on sanctions against Venezuela, saying they haven't done the toughest yet, and that's something he might do. Now, Devin, this issue has been one of President Trump's hallmark foreign policy issues, and one of the reporters asked the president if he's growing a little frustrated at the lack of progress there so far. Not a direct answer from the president there, but Devin, certainly he hasn't really moved the needle forward on this issue in any major way. Maduro is still in power.
He sure is. Here's what the president had to say about the fact that Nicolas Maduro hasn't budged one bit. Take a listen.
I'm not being told any specific time. They've been there a long time between him and his predecessor. At some point, I would imagine things will change. But we really haven't done the really tough sanctions yet. We can do the tough sanctions, and all options are open, so we may be doing that. But we haven't done the toughest of sanctions, as you know. We've done, I would say, right down the middle. But we can go a lot tougher if we need to do that.
And if there was one thing, Jordan Phelps, that seemed to make his guest uncomfortable, it was this prospect of U.S. military intervention in Venezuela. And you heard him there say all options are on the table. Any indication that he's any closer to sending U.S. troops down there?
No, Devin, no indication there. We're really hearing the same thing we've heard all along from the president on that score.
All right, let's bring Rick Klein into the conversation here, because the president shifting away from substance a little bit, Rick, past 24 hours or so, and coming out swinging against two sort of familiar foes, but sort of head scratchers as to why he's picking these fights now. Let's talk about this John McCain fight that percolated over the weekend. It continued today. What's your read on why he's going back to the McCain punching bag right now? Is it to stir up the base?
Well, the president likes to say he's a counterpuncher. We can safely say that McCain didn't start this one. He passed away 7 months ago. That's what makes this so strange. So best we can tell, it was almost a throwaway comment from a guest on a cable news program talking about John McCain that got him fired up. And he sees a reaction and must continue to hit that. And finally saying today that he's just not a fan, never has been a fan, never will be a fan. I think we get that now.
Yeah.
And I think it's such a strange thing. Obviously, a man was an American hero, revered for his service to the country, service in war. The president has lots of political disagreements with him, is upset still by his health care vote, upset by other actions and comments after the fact. We remember his funeral and the send-off that gave that seemed a repudiation of Trumpism. But all of that would seem to be in the past for everyone other than President Trump, who still has a fixation on John McCain.
It seems so unnecessary. We've heard Meghan McCain, his daughter, on The View here on ABC, talk about that, the oddity of bringing this up. And the president today was asked again, why are you going back after John McCain, seemingly unprompted? And here's what he had to say in the Oval Office. Take a listen.
President, why are you attacking Senator John McCain 7 months after his death?
I'm very unhappy that he didn't repeal and replace Obamacare. As you know, he campaigned on repealing and replacing Obamacare for years. And then he got to a vote and he said thumbs down. And our country would have saved $1 trillion and we would have had great health care. So he campaigned. He told us hours before that he was going to repeal and replace. And then for some reason, I think I understand the reason, he ended up going thumbs up. And frankly, had we even known that, I think we would have gotten a vote because we could have gotten somebody else. So I think that's disgraceful. Plus, there are other things. I was never a fan of John McCain, and I never will be.
So, Jordan, the president has a history of sort of using straw men as sort of diversions from other unsavory topics. I mean, is this What's your read on why he's attacking McCain now?
Yeah, Devin, it's just remarkable. And if this was a diversionary tactic, tweeting about John McCain this weekend, as he did, there were a lot of diversions. The president sent over 50 tweets this weekend alone, which is prolific even by Trump standards. But it looks like, Devin, here, the president just can't let this grudge go. The president there in the Oval Office said there are other things. I think the other things the president's referring to there is what he was tweeting about this weekend. He's accused McCain of trying to spread the Salacious Steele dossier before the election. But, Devin, we know that's not accurate because McCain didn't get access to that dossier until after the election.
So much of the politics today over there in the West Wing seemingly petty, Rick, not just attacking John McCain, but also going after the husband of his close personal advisor, Kellyanne Conway, where they have been engaged in this really extraordinary public feud on Twitter. President Trump hitting back at George Conway, Kellyanne Conway's husband. We see a picture of him there, who has repeatedly questioned President Trump's fitness for office. This just seems so childish to me that we're even talking about this, but the president has elevated this issue.
Yeah, and this is different than a James Carville, Mary Madeline, kind of good-natured. We're on different teams here. You're right. George Conway has consistently used the president's own words to say, wake up, people, wake up, Congress, wake up, Republicans. He is a Republican, a well-known Republican lawyer, and say he is not fit for the office of the presidency. Mentally fit, even, he'll go so far as saying. So the president's swinging back at all of this, as you can expect. It is just the strangest set of circumstances when his wife is out there speaking on behalf of this White House in often very dramatic and in very substantial ways, trying to defend the president's actions. To have her husband saying this, and George Conway giving interviews to the Washington Post trying to explain a little bit this bizarre relationship that's behind this feud.
It's so strange. And Jordan, before we let you go, you caught up with Kellyanne Conway, asked her about this. What'd she have to say when you asked her why the president's calling her husband a loser?
Yeah, Devin, I had a chance to ask her yesterday if she shares these views that her husband is expressing on Twitter, and she said she does not share his concerns, Devin. But it is interesting, as Rick alluded to that interview in the Washington Post, now to see George Conway kind of taking this dirty laundry out into the public, insisting he is proud of his wife, but Devin also at the same time taking credit in part for where she is today. So just a really embarrassing story for this couple, really, to have this splashed out in the public, but they have put it there.
It's so childish, as we've been saying. And we should say, for the record, we've asked the First Lady's office if she has an opinion on this public feud and the name-calling between George Conway and the president in light of her Be Best initiative. They haven't responded to us just yet, but we'll let you know when they do. Jordan Phelps, thank you so much at the White House. Appreciate your reporting. Moving on now, Rick, we're learning some new details today into Special Counsel Robert Mueller's probe, these unsealed warrants, search warrants, in the case of Michael Cohen.
Yeah, a lot we still don't know, but the most important headline, I think, on this is just the timeline. To know that Mueller had access to the Cohen emails more than a year, I believe, before the raid that burst everything into public view. And just a suggestion that they're going further with prosecutors in the Southern District and with the Mueller probe than we even knew before. That they were interested in Cohen from a very early time.
One of the first things Bob Mueller did after he was appointed, 2 months, in fact, after he was appointed, he went into get a search warrant to look into Michael Cohen's emails. Of course, Michael Cohen at the center of the Trump world as his personal attorney for so many years. Our investigative reporter, Aaron Katursky, has been covering this case from the beginning. Aaron joins us from New York. Aaron, what's your take on all these documents that were unsealed today? What do you make of them?
I think the timeline that you point out is the big one, that Robert Mueller had barely been on the job as special counsel 2 months, and he's already routing around in the email accounts of Michael Cohen. And what's in there that he finds? Plenty of evidence, according to these search warrant affidavits unsealed today under a court order, about different kinds of financial crimes, bank fraud and perjury and lying to Congress, and also evidence of potential lobbying violations, because we know that Michael Cohen was shopping his access to the incoming administration, saying that he, for a price, could perhaps curry favor. And a number of companies had taken him up on it, including some that were based overseas in possible violation of FARA laws. And the documents also give us a window into Michael Cohen's motivation. At the time Donald Trump came into office and Cohen had been by his side for the prior decade, he was about $22 million in debt on loans that he had taken out based on a side business that he had owning taxi medallions, the licenses that allow taxi cabs in New York City to operate. And at one point, he claimed, as recently as 2014, that those licenses were so lucrative, he was worth $77 million. 2 years later, as Uber and Lyft start to take control of how people get around in urban areas, the price of taxi medallions plummeted, and Michael Cohen claimed his net worth was just $2 million. So in 2 years, he claimed his net worth dropped $75 million. That's when, according to these documents, he started shopping his access to the incoming president.
Wow, and he later, of course, pleaded guilty in federal court in New York for a number of violations. Some of those you mentioned, the campaign finance violations, lying to Congress among them. Aaron, what's the latest on when Cohen, who has been paraded around Washington in recent weeks, when's he headed to prison? He serves 3 years, right?
He does 3 years in prison that he'll have to serve beginning on May 6th. And in the meantime, he says he's still cooperating with federal prosecutors here in New York about other possible crimes that he may know about that involve President Trump. Now, we're not sure how seriously federal prosecutors are taking Michael Cohen at his word at this point. We know that Cohen certainly is hoping that any cooperation would get him a lesser sentence. But I think there's something that was not revealed in the documents unsealed today that's particularly telling. And Devin, that's the extensive redactions of any portion having to do with the campaign finance violation. Almost 20 pages worth of filings that would support the underlying campaign finance case, the hush payments to women, Stormy Daniels, Karen McDougal, that Cohen pleaded guilty to and implicated the president in. All that's redacted, and that's an indication that that investigation is ongoing.
Ongoing, but perhaps soon to be concluded as we eagerly await Robert Mueller's probe and that delivery of that report to the Justice Department. Aaron Katersky, thanks so much. Always great to see you. Moving on now, speaking of lawsuits involving President Trump, Rick, a major one before a federal appeals court today. This one involving allegations by the state of Maryland and the District of Columbia that the president has abused his power, violated the Constitution by setting up shop at the old post office here in town, setting up a Trump hotel, and accepting business from foreign companies.
And this is a fascinating one to me because the Trump attorneys have always recognized this as a potential weak spot. The Constitution is very clear on this. So they've made clear, well, we're going to donate all the proceeds. Now, there's no visibility on what that is. And there's all sorts of other peripheral arrangements that I think there's widespread suspicion on. So this tests a very fundamental principle and of how government operates and what exactly the founders intended on this. It doesn't come up very often that you talk about the emoluments clause, but it's been on the tips of everyone's tongues.
And let's take a look. We do have the emoluments clause. It's a word we talk about a lot. You may go, what was that again? Well, the Constitution spells it out for you. Here it is. Take a look. Let's put it up. The emoluments clause says this. It says, no person holding any office, in this case President Trump, shall accept any present, emolument, office title of any kind, whatever, from any king, prince, or foreign state. And of course, in this case, as Rick, you just mentioned, the allegation is that President Trump, in accepting business at the hotel, is sort of enriching himself illegally while he's in the Oval Office, currying favor there. And today, as I understand it, the justices, a three-judge panel at the appeals court, were sort of skeptical of that argument. They said presidents are, of course, allowed to do business. Our Catherine Falders was in the courtroom. She also has been tracking the Trump Organization's business operations at the hotel, and she has the latest. Hey, Catherine.
Hey, Devin. Yeah, we're here in Richmond, Virginia, outside the Court of Appeals, where lawyers for President Trump showed up in court today to argue claims that the president violated the emoluments clause. Now, this is a constitutional clause that prohibits elected officials from doing business with foreign governments. Now, the lawyers argued there's no authority to sue the president in his official capacity because of the office he holds, saying he is, quote, unique and immune from the matter. Now, this judge panel in here today was a three-judge panel, and it got a little testy in there. They're all Republican-appointed judges, and they seemed skeptical at times of the suit in the first place. Now, as a reminder, Devin, this case was brought jointly by the attorneys general from Maryland and Washington, D.C. Now, they're arguing that Trump has benefited from the patronage of foreign dignitaries at the Trump International Hotel, which, as you know, is just located a few blocks from the White House. And the hotel does see its fair share of foreign government officials, dignitaries from Bahrain, Azerbaijan, Nigeria, and South Korea, just to name a few, have all been spotted in the hotel. And just last month, the hotel hosted the Kuwaiti Embassy's National Gala. Now, the attorneys who have brought the lawsuit against Trump, they're arguing that foreign officials who patronize Trump's D.C. property may be currying favor with the president. But lawyers for the president argued here today that the claim is, quote, too speculative. Now, the judges, as I mentioned, were a little testy at times. One of the judges implied at one point that Trump's presidency could actually be helping other businesses because those who were coming into town to protest the president were likely not staying at the Trump Hotel and could be going to the National Harbor in Maryland. Now, Judge Shedd, the same judge who argued that previous claim, then suggested that this argument could be reminiscent to the travel ban. Now, why did he say this? He said, what if the president said that no foreigners could stay at his property? He asked the attorneys bringing the case, would you be satisfied if the hotel gave a break so they can pay less than Americans? Does that solve the problem? Now, when asked how to solve the problem, the attorney said it's, quote, hard to say at this point what solves it because it just depends on the facts on the ground. Now, what's next in this case? Now, this court will rule as to whether this will move forward. But afterwards, at a press conference, Devin, the Attorney General for Washington, D.C., Karl Racine, said he's confident in the arguments that he heard here today and said if he loses, they believe this will end up in the Supreme Court. Devin.
All right, thanks to Catherine Faulders for that reporting. As the case works its way through the system, of course, the hotel's still in business. You've been over there, Rick.
Yeah, you can get a good steak over there.
It's quite the place to see and be seen in this town. At the very least, the appearance of coziness and seeking to curry favor with the president is on full display. And our Kira Phillips, investigative reporter, correspondent, joins us now from New York. She has done
investigated the menu, investigated the cocktail menu.
She has poured over that cocktail list at the Trump Hotel. In fact, what's your favorite cocktail there, Kira?
Am I allowed to admit that the champagne isn't that bad? Am I violating the emoluments clause in any way if I admit?
You had to do a full vetting of that because it's Trump-branded champagne, I believe, right?
It is. I mean, yeah. I actually didn't realize he had his own brand of wine, his own brand of champagne. But just listening to this whole conversation with you guys and also with Catherine outside the courthouse, I mean, this is something we've been talking about for months. And Devin, it's sort of, I mean, it's comical when you say, okay, here's the definition of emoluments. And we laugh about that. But you know how many people have come up to me even today and stopped me and said, what exactly is emoluments? What does that mean? Why should we care about that? And we all had to study up on exactly what that was and this lawsuit and how the attorneys general are saying that they believe the president is violating the emoluments clause. And just to give you a little bit of history, Devin, because I know you like little value added.
Love it.
Okay, so because so many people were asking us about the emoluments clause and what it is and where did it come from, we did a little history and we found out that the framers of our Constitution were concerned about bribes and that they wrote the emoluments clause into the Constitution because they were concerned that our leaders would be corrupted by rich European powers like Ben Franklin accepting a diamond-encrusted snuff box from the King of France and John Jay accepting a horse from the King of Spain. So that's how far back we're going. And this is historic because this has never been tried in court. I mean, what Maryland and D.C. and the attorneys general are doing is quite historic. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, Devin. And also, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, and well, their argument is you go over to the lobby of the hotel, you guys have been there, and you walk in and it's really a who's who of foreign dignitaries, and I guess the modern equivalent of the diamond-studded snuff box
diamond-encrusted snuff box, get that right.
A whole bunch of very expensive steak dinner bills, expensive hotel rooms, renting the ballroom. I mean, that's the case they're making
Or
here.
A selfie with Corey Lewandowski.
Exactly.
Any of those things possible.
Well, and that's what what they're saying is that is the president profiting off the presidency? Because when I talked with Elijah Cummings about this, chairman of the House Oversight Committee, I said, would this even have been an issue if he divested his empire? And he said, no. but he refused to do so. Therefore, this is an issue. So that's why they have issued all these subpoenas, and they want to see how much money is being spent there, who's spending the money there, and are these foreign dignitaries thinking that they're going to somehow curry favor with the president if they're dropping hundreds of thousands of dollars at his hotel.
We know you'll stay on the case. Kara Phillips, thanks so much. And we should give a plug to your new podcast. It's fantastic. The Investigation, out today. New episode with author Vicky Ward of the book Kushner, Inc. A lot of good stuff in there. Hope you download it. Take a listen. Kara, thanks so much for coming on from New York City today. Moving on, Rick, this fight over the president's emergency declaration at the southern border has not gone away. Congress is out of town. But a very interesting delivery landed on Capitol Hill today, I think, from the Pentagon. And that is a list of those military construction projects that could be robbed of funds to help pay for the new wall.
Yeah, this makes this real. It's one thing to say you support the idea of an emergency declaration or you don't. There's a big vote in Congress on that. It's another to say, okay, where are you going to get the money from? Because now, in black and white in this list, and it's a long list, are all the potential projects on the cutting block. And that makes it real for lawmakers. I think it's critical that it's out now before a veto override vote, because I think a lot of members of Congress are going to hear about the pluses and minuses of things in their districts.
And released when they're not in town to sound off on all the cable channels and be forced with cameras in their faces by the likes of us up on Capitol Hill. But our Pentagon reporter Elizabeth McLaughlin joins us now from the Pentagon. She's been tracking this document, looking over the list of potential projects that could lose funding. Elizabeth, what stands out to you on that list? And have any of them actually been confirmed as the ones that the president will sacrifice?
Yeah, Devin, it's a very, very long list. And I think the biggest problem with it is that it doesn't prioritize what the Pentagon is actually considering to be the most vulnerable projects here that could be cut. So you'll see on screen some of the ones that caught my eye when I was going through this list: that fleet maintenance facility in Bahrain, a machine gun range in Guam. Senator Cohen put out a press release last night after this list went to Capitol Hill, saying he was concerned about a cybersecurity facility in Virginia, of course, his home state. So you're going to see those constituents being concerned about their constituents. But really, we don't know of these projects what will ultimately get cut. And that's what we need to hear from the Pentagon. What is actually vulnerable? What is actually most likely to be used to get to that $3.6 billion that the president wants for the wall?
And it is a political hot potato, as Rick mentioned. So who actually gets to decide which on that very long list are the ones that are going to lose out? Whose job is that? Is that Trump or the defense secretary?
That is acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan. So the first thing he's going to do is get a list from the Department of Homeland Security. That's going to say which projects that they would like to see on the southern border that would be that $3.6 billion. So once they approve those projects, then they have a better sense of how much money they're going to need, and that's when they'll start going through and deciding which of these MILCON military construction projects will have their funding repurposed for the wall, and then it'll be awarded hopefully next fiscal year. The Pentagon is asking for an additional $3.6 billion in its budget to cover the money that'll go out the window, and then another $3.6 billion should Trump ask for even more money.
Yeah, there'll be a political firestorm as well in Capitol Hill. Some more lawsuits for sure. Elizabeth McLaughlin at the Pentagon, rather. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Rick, moving on today, it is really heating up out there on the campaign trail. Hard to believe we are so far out from those first votes in the Iowa caucuses. But the candidates really starting to barnstorm Iowa. We saw in other parts of the country, we saw Elizabeth Warren. Let's start with her. Off the town hall last night on CNN, she is on the trail today in the Deep South. Boy, is she going for the heart of it. She is actively courting the African-American vote this week.
Yeah, make no mistake about how important this is. These are not states like Mississippi, Alabama. You're not going to see a Democrat carry them in the fall. No one, not even Elizabeth Warren, is pretending otherwise. However, they are critical once the primaries start. A bunch of them vote in March. The African-American vote, absolutely essential in a Democratic primary. And I am struck by some of the campaigning that you're seeing in parts of the country that don't normally see primaries primary challengers this early, I think people like Elizabeth Warren recognize in this crowded field, you need to get there early, you need to get there often, and you need to campaign in places that don't normally see Democratic candidates for
president.
president.
Talking about some very bold and unusual ideas that haven't been top ticket items, and we talk about healthcare, taxes, immigration, and the like. But the past couple of days, we've heard about expanding the size of the Supreme Court, even abolishing the Electoral College. Elizabeth Warren made some comments to our Breanna Stewart about that. Let's take a listen.
You said that you want to eliminate the Electoral College.
I do.
How will you ensure voting rights for all Americans, particularly Black Americans who already struggle with voting rights as it stands now?
I believe we need a constitutional amendment to guarantee the right to vote to every single citizen and to guarantee that that vote gets counted. We need to put some real federal muscle behind that. I believe we ought to repeal every one of the voter suppression laws, that we need to be an America where voting matters for everyone. And part of that is making sure that candidates for the highest federal office come to all of America and make the case for why they should be president of the United States. You know, nobody comes to Alabama in the general presidential election or to Massachusetts because they figure we're not in the game because of the Electoral College. So my view on this is that we ought to get rid of the Electoral College. A vote counts for everyone. And that's what I believe.
Memory of Hillary Clinton winning the popular vote in 2016, fresh on many Democrats' minds. But Rick, I mean, this is a long shot idea, even if it does sort of jazz the base about voting equity. Yeah,
and I think it's similar to this Supreme Court idea. You're not going to see this happen. It's about as likely to be amended as the emoluments clause. And these are not things that are going to happen. But they do get the Democratic base excited. And I think the idea of bold policy at this moment is an important hallmark. And I think you're seeing Elizabeth Warren break through a bit in the early going because she's going a little bit further than some of her contemporaries and challengers.
She's putting out some specifics and a lot of policy ideas, putting some meat on the bones. One person that's gotten a lot of flack for lack of specifics is Beto O'Rourke of Texas, former congressman. Real quick before we close out, let's take a listen. He has been asked repeatedly over the past few days, when is he going to get more specific on some of his policy proposals? Here's one way he answered that question.
When are we going to get an actual policy from you instead of just like platitudes and nice stories?
Thank you. I'm going to try to be as specific as I can. I mentioned our criminal justice system. I've called for the end of the prohibition on marijuana and the expungement of the arrest records of everyone who's been arrested for marijuana. I've been doing that for a long time. In every single policy area, I'm trying to describe not just the goal and the aspiration, but the path that we will take to get there.
Well, that's maybe what he thinks, but there's not a lot of specifics there, and he is taking a lot of heat, certainly in the media, Rick. But we're a long ways out. But for a Democratic phenom raising $6.1 million, the top money getter so far, very interesting that he's getting hammered by even some of his supporters there in that questioning for not having the fine print ready.
He's 5 days in, and I remember Barack Obama as a freshly minted candidate in 2007 taking heat for not having a health care plan. Obviously, he had a health care plan. They ended up enacting that health care plan, so things change. But it is, I think, the last part of that answer was interesting for Beto O'Rourke to talk about how he's trying to chart the goals here and not just policy specifics, especially when you're up against people like Elizabeth Warren, Mayor Pete, out there with a lot of bold policy.
Heavyweights.
And ideas that they're pushing forward. It forces the rest of the field to adjust to that. But you're seeing this heart versus head divide that the Democrats always seem to have in wanting to fall in love with someone like Beto O'Rourke, but loving the ideas that they're hearing from people like Elizabeth Warren. It's going to be something to square.
Love talking with you, Rick Klein, political director. Much more in the note tomorrow on abcnews.com. Much more on the ABC News app. If you haven't downloaded it, take the time to do it. You can watch us live coverage there all day long and the latest in all the stories we talked about. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. We'll see you tomorrow at 3:30 Eastern here in the briefing room.